Welcome to the Government Operations Committee meeting for March 20th, 2023. I'd like to call the meeting to order at 1:05. And thank you, staff, for sending out the agenda. We will we need to hopefully we review the last meeting minutes that we had, the last meeting that we had on February 20th. I reviewed them. I didn't see any omissions or errors. So can I get a motion to approve?
So moved.
Oh, a second.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Ayes have it. Okay. One thing I did forgot to do is introduce everybody. Going to be since it may be a long meeting, just like to introduce everybody to our GLC meeting. Thank you, staff, for being here, and my fellow commissioners. All right. First, we would like to we're going to get into creation of the public safety monitor function. We received a resolution from Peace Corps, and I do want to say I'm very disappointed in that resolution. I'd like to speak on behalf of that. If you guys give me some time, we'll open it up to the floor for the commissioners, and then we'll bring it back in for staff to move forward. Oh, all righty. So we received a resolution from Peace Corps, and and I commend Peace Corps for the work they have done and all the work they have contributed to, and I understand their passion, but I'm a little disappointed in the resolution. First of all, when it comes to as a public servant, I have to serve not only the people in District 1, I have to serve the 130,000 people in Athens-Clarke County. And all those people may have different voices. And it's up to me as well, and hopefully up to my colleagues as well, to also listen to other voices. I'm gonna go through, if I can find it, the Peace Corps resolution. For starters, one of the things that was on the resolution is to sit in on the interviewing process. So that will set precedent. No other organization or commission sits in on the interview process for a charter position. For example, the Board of Elections, they don't sit on the interview process because of confidentiality, because of other personnel issues. They don't sit on the interview process for the office of the for the Board of Elections office. Excuse me. And then I would like to. So unfortunately, we're not going to recommend that. That's not going to happen. So we need to move forward on that because it just the mayor has said it, staff has said it over and over again, and I think at this point, just let us continue to do the process that we have set out for. When it comes to being slow, and some people feel that we are hindering the success of Peace Corps, that could be further from the truth. So last year, before last year, there was a 2020 grand jury to oversight committee to commission to look at how our government operates, and one of the recommendations was to redo the Office of Operational Analysis. And once they completed that process, they sent it up to the mayor commission for us to review. And then finally, the mayor created a small committee to review and revamp the whole Office of Operational Analysis. So that process got finished back in December of 2022, and then we finally released sent the job description to HR to post so we can hire for that position. But in the interim, while we were doing that, we went through a process of getting the Peace Corps trained. That was a few months during the summer of getting them trained. We have them build their bylaw, we have them build their structure. And one of the recommendations was to send to the full mayor commission their recommendation. That was sent in January of this year. So the notion that we're slowing Peace Corps down and that we don't care or that we don't like them, they can be further from the truth. We're just following a process. When it comes to reseating me on the GOC, that's up to the mayor. The less stress that I have, the better. But at the end of the day, people got to understand you got to play your cards right, because even if you reseat me or if I step down, you're still going to get the same outcome. Because at the end of the day, this process was that the, whatever recommendation will go through the GOC and then, go to the full mayor commission. And right now, the resolution that was presented doesn't have enough votes on this mayor commission or the prior mayor commission to get passed. And that is all I'd like to say, but, I do want to say that, I'm at this point of considering receiving the entire, board of Peace Corps. I know it's gonna be a lengthy process, but, my mom and dad has always told me that if something start off bad and continues to be bad, just go ahead and scrap it and start over, because you continue, you're gonna continue to have those same problems. And that's my recommendation. Now, it's of course, it's up to y'all in the full mayor commission. Is I have some issues concerning the position being filled and the same type of resolutions that demands continue for the new position. And if for the new commission, we've had some turnover within our government because there's been a lot of demands from the commission from community where staff members have been overwhelmed. And I would love for whoever gets into this new position to, to not have that pressure. Um, but that, of course, is up to us to decide when we send it off to the full mayor and commission. And now I'll open up to the floor for discussion.
I think, I'll go ahead and interject. I think, a couple of things, we need to consider here when we, looking at Peace Corps. First of all, we need to get an auditor hired. And again, that position has been posted, and the mayor has, designated myself, Commissioner Myers, to serve on that particular committee to get us an auditor hired. And then I think what needs to happen, once we look at the makeup of the auditor's office, what that's gonna look like, we need to work with that individual. And if we're gonna, have somebody from her office working with Peace Corps, or if that individual makes a decision that I need to have another person in my office to work with Peace Corps in order to look at the investigation about the 4 agencies that have come under the resolution. And I think we need to lead that up to that auditor once we get that person hired. Last thing I want to do as a commissioner, go ahead and get these things started, and the person that we get hired didn't have any input.
Okay,
And say so on this. I think that's number one.
that's fair.
We need to get the auditor person hired. Now at this particular point, I would not recommend that we disband Peace Corps Committee right now. I would like for us to hopefully continue to work with them. But I may recommend is we add more people to the Peace Corps board. And again, this one man's opinion. It's not as diverse as it needs to be. The majority of the members are under 40, so we got an age discrepancy on there for us. It should look like the community, and right now Peace Corps doesn't look like the community from that perspective when it comes to age and things like that, and also thought processes. So thought process, but I would not recommend that we disband them at this time. I would recommend that we add more members to again get other thought processes and get a little bit more diversity among the age. That's part of the piece moving forward. So that would be, Mr. Chair, my recommendation.
And I did forget to add, there was also a recommendation for the ACC, no affiliation with ACC Public Safety. I'm not gonna fall on the sword on that one. It's not a big deal for me. It just, when it comes to logic, let's say we need to hire somebody from McDonald's. I don't know why that popped in my head. We need to hire somebody. So we can't hire anybody from the gang school run McDonald's, but we can hire somebody from the Prince Avenue McDonald's, the US 29 McDonald's, the Atlanta Highway McDonald's. I think those are all McDonald's. So they're all McDonald's. So what would be the difference? But you see what I'm saying? So like we hire somebody from the ACCPD, Kenosha, with Milwaukee or whatnot, you know, it's still gonna be McDonald's. But that's just my logic. I'm not gonna follow the sword on that one. But I'd love to get your feedback on that as well.
Yeah, same here. I mean, if this reason to stay in there, and again, my reason was I didn't want to be limited to find the right people. You know, now if say we do a limited and we get 100 applications for that, you know, that's outside the HCPD or the jail or the prison system or probation. So I just think that it limit us. You know, we talk so much in this community about hiring people that live in this community a lot. That came me a lot. So, you know, we always go outside to get folks. So again, but I'm like, I'm not gonna follow the sport on it. If we want to leave that in there, I can live with it, and you know, we can move forward and keep it moving.
All right. Any feedback? So based on feedback, let's say let's either table this or send to the full mayor commission the only recommendation of getting the auditor hired, the office of operation seated first, with that person potentially hire someone potentially part-time to be the auditor monitor, or can you repeat what you said?
Okay, I'm not sure how many employees is in that office or will be in that office. And I know HR will tell us that.
Yeah. So,
but again, at the same time, that once we get that person hired, give them an opportunity to say, okay, well, I got somebody on my staff that can do this. And then maybe we won't have to hire them on. Or they may say, I do need to hire a monitor full time.
Okay.
To look at what piece of all the need.
All right,
to be fair about it, again, I think we need to get that person in place.
And we have two presentations, quick presentations today that I think will help begin to answer these questions.
All right.
And so we could go through those presentations, and then after that, maybe I'll share what we're missing, what you need to make a decision. If it's okay with the chair, I think it'd be good to start with the police department's presentation. So Deputy Chief Harrison Daniel is here. In your minutes from last meeting, y'all shared you wanted to update on the complaint numbers that the police department is seeing. So Deputy Chief Daniel has prepared that and a slide kind of just explaining their process. And if y'all are good to move forward to that, Chair.
Yes, sir.
All right. Deputy Chief.
Great, thank you. I appreciate it. So in response to the GOC, we've compiled the last several years of complaint data. The first slide you're looking at just shows the overall number of complaints per year dating back to 2017, and then it includes last year, 2022. So we generally categorize or type complaints into one of several categories. It could be a service complaint, which is essentially somebody's complaining they weren't happy with the level or quality of service. It could be a complaint of an explicit policy violation. Could be a complaint of criminal conduct, a use of force or excessive force complaint, and then we also individually categorize bias-based policing complaints. But this is an overall look at our data. As you can see, the majority of our complaints are service level complaints. That can be anything from, I didn't like the outcome of the incident, to I don't think the officers did all they could have done in response to this call or this investigation. But those aren't always necessarily policy violations or misconduct complaints. And then we do have a few, additional complaints below, which tend to be less numbers. But that's just a broad picture of our complaint data over the last 6 years, including last year. I guess if anybody has questions at any point, feel free to ask, and I'll just keep moving through the data.
I've got a question. Yes. So, go ahead, Tiffany.
With service complaints, policy violation complaints, and bias-based complaints, shouldn't that just be like 1 point? Do they not coincide with one another, or are they just because policy violation complaints, if a resident doesn't know police policy, then I would think that that would be to, one, instead of it being so broad, that service, but, that's my question.
No, good question. So we don't expect that a member of the community know our policies necessarily. What we do is we take what they've said or they're accusing the officer of doing, and then we interpret that into our policy. Okay, they said that the officer cursed at them excessively or something to that effect, and we have a specific policy violation for that, right? So then we consider that a policy violation. So we're not expecting that. The other thing is, to your earlier point, so bias-based policing is a policy issue for us. However, we like to distinguish that out because it's a more critical issue. So we separate that out from just general policy violations so that we can assess that marker in particular. Great questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Harrison. My question is, with each of these complaints, who is it that's responsible for looking into the complaints, and how long does it take them to look into the complaints?
Good question, and that's covered here in just a minute. We're going to go over what the process looks like, and we could skip ahead to that or just keep moving through. Either way is fine.
Or just keep moving.
But that's a good question. I'm going to address that. All right, so this is a capture of the complaints received. This is discipline associated with sustained complaints for the same time period. So you can see just a basic breakdown of any disciplinary actions that resulted in a sustained complaint. And so general types are suspension, demotion, termination, or reprimand. Those are the general types of discipline issued. Now, there's other non-disciplinary responses based on the county's progressive disciplinary system, such as coaching, counseling, training, things like that. And we'll talk a little bit more in a minute about what that means. But essentially, anytime there's a sustained policy violation, we have to have some kind of action, whether it's disciplinary or non-disciplinary. And again, this is a breakdown. I think we skipped a slide somehow in here. There's one more slide on the data. Oh, there we go, dispositions. So this slide just provides what the outcome of each complaint for each year was. And so you can see the basic breakdown we have on the left is complaints can be unfounded. That means it never occurred or didn't occur in the way the person alleged. It could be sustained, which means the officer did what they were alleged of doing and it was a policy violation. It can be not sustained. That's more or less our investigation couldn't really prove one way or the other, whether it occurred or not. There's discrepancy in information, and it could result in exoneration of the officer. And what that means is the person alleged the officer did action A, and we find the officer did do action A. However, action A was deemed reasonable and appropriate and within proper policy and legal guidelines. And so the person may not have been satisfied with that, but that was the appropriate response from the officer. And so therefore their actions were exonerated. And then last, occasionally we look at something where the officer has done something or been accused of doing something, and we say, hey, we don't actually have a policy to cover that. And if that's the case, then we consider that to be a policy review, and we say, well, if that's something we don't want them doing in the future, yet there's no policy or outlining that prohibition, and we need to review that and change that in the future.
You go back to that first slide.
Which one?
This one, discipline.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us what happened with terminations in 2017 and 18? And what changed in 2020, 2021?
So I can't speak to the individual cases. I would have to look at those. I don't know precisely. I do know that in 2018, we had a different chief of police, and that was Chief Scott Freeman during that year. But I can't speak to the individual cases.
Okay, thank you.
So he could be terminated from anything. I think it might not have been police misconduct, could have been some other stuff.
Well, I do know we had, just generally my memory is that there were a higher number of people terminated that year during probationary status or in similar circumstances for failing to meet standards than normal. And just another quick note, all this data is available on our transparency page. It's all available to the public. All right, so this is just a quick breakdown of how we process complaints, speaking to Commissioner Hamby's question. So anytime a complaint comes in, the first thing we're going to do is have to assess the complaint, determine what's the nature and how do we classify that. So that requires a meeting with the complainant. That could be a supervisor, so it could be 10 o'clock at night and somebody calls into 911 and says, hey, an officer just came out to my house on a call and I want to complain against them because I think they did something wrong. And then the supervisor who's working or on duty at that time would be responsible for handling that initial assessment. It could be somebody who walks in the front office of our headquarters during normal business hours and speaks to the front desk. And then they would be routed typically to our Office of Professional Standards, or if they're not available immediately at the moment, then they would be given a form to fill out that would be submitted, and then somebody could respond to them after that. So once we assess it, then we're going to have to refer it. Sometimes people say they have a complaint, but it's not actually a complaint about us. It could be anything. People say I have a complaint and it's something about another organization. It could be a traffic issue, or I want to file a complaint and it turns out to be it's a complaint of crime going on in the neighborhood. But they submit it, for example, through our complaint system for misconduct, and they just didn't understand how they were submitting a complaint. So when that's the case, it's a non-investigative issue or something else, and then we get referred to the appropriate source. Occasionally, there's something where it's not really investigative because of just the nature of the circumstances. So they're not alleging any misconduct by the officer, or the information available is so clear cut, it doesn't really require full investigation of any kind. So it could be referred over for that. But generally, if we have some suspicion that there's misconduct, it's going to be routed to one of 3 places or more. First is unit level inquiry. That's typically minor issues or things that are less complex. Minor policy violation could be a rudeness issue or something very procedural, and that's going to be a unit level inquiry. Those are typically handled by the chain of command and the supervisors for the officer or officers involved, and then monitored by our Office of Professional Standards. If it's more serious or it's a more complex case, then it would be handled as an administrative investigation. There's a more formal process involved in that, and that's generally going to be handled at a higher level, either by a captain, if it's within the division that the officer or officers are assigned to, or by our Office of Professional Standards. And then there's also criminal investigation. So if the conduct is alleged to be criminal, then we would refer that to the Georgia Bureau of Investigations for a criminal investigation. And so either a unit level inquiry or an admin investigation will happen if there's a misconduct. However, if it's criminal, we'll also have a criminal side by side, but taking precedent over the administrative side. And then, of course, we also do our criminal investigation referral anytime an officer is involved in an incident that results in serious injury or death. So an officer involved shooting, for example.
Quick question, maybe they can't answer this. The 3 other agencies, do they do something similar like the jail, probation, and the corrections? Do they have a similar process? No.
I don't want to speak to anything with their processes.
Okay.
Each have one that's a little different. Corrections are the most different because the state GDC runs the process. And corrections doesn't. But we could definitely bring everybody in to describe it. I wouldn't want to, gloss over into detail. But the police department is the most concrete and has the most complaints of any of the others.
I think, if we're gonna do justice, with Peace Corps, I think, maybe we know the complaints for the jail, they had probation, they have had, same thing with, correction.
Yeah. And this summer, Peace Corps, as part of their onboarding, spent time with each of the agencies. 8 straight weeks, we went around and visited each of the agencies, and I'm sure the agencies would be glad to come and present their processes to you all if you're interested.
So have they already shared this, because I don't want to reinvent the wheel.
They each had a PowerPoint. I could even just get the slide and the PowerPoint cells.
Yeah.
Okay.
If that's better.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, we could work on that.
Great, thank you.
All right, so this essentially repackages slightly what our investigative process looks like if it's assigned to unit level inquiry or an administrative investigation. As I said a minute ago, unit level inquiry is a more informal process. It's minor issues. And generally, if there's a sustained complaint that's resulting from a unit level inquiry, if it's a first time offense or first time issue for an officer, it's going to result in coaching or counseling, which is by ACC Gov standards, not disciplinary action. It's kind of positive. It's kind of like failing forward. It's an attempt to correct behavior without discipline. And that's a coaching or counseling, could be training. And then with an administrative investigation, typically, like I said, it's a formalized process. Officers have more due process there because there's potential loss of property rights. They could be suspended, for example, or terminated. And so there's property rights issues. So we have a more formalized process for due process there and proper notifications for officers along the way and for the complainant. And then, like I said, the result could be disciplinary action in that, or if we believe that, hey, if this is sustained, then it's going to result in disciplinary action. If it were sustained, then those would also go to administrative investigation. Even if, let's say, it's a minor, seemingly minor offense, but the initial review of the officer's record or file says, hey, they've been subject of 5 sustained complaints in a year or 2 years. They're all minor, but something's not working with coaching and counseling, and so we need to go through progressive disciplinary action. And that is consistent with ACC Gov's stance on personnel management in general. This slide just kind of highlights what were to happen if a complaint is sustained. And so to the right of that red dotted line are disciplinary actions, and then to the left are non-disciplinary actions. And so if it's a minor issue or something where we believe it can be corrected through coaching, counseling, training, it may be a transfer issue that's appropriate. It may be EAP or something like that. That's the Employee Assistance Program. Maybe this officer needs some help with something going on in their life and it will correct some performance issues. If that's appropriate, then those are non-disciplinary responses. However, if it's something more serious, then to the right of that dotted line, those are disciplinary actions. And so the officer could face anything from just a written reprimand up to and including termination, depending on the severity of the offense or how many repeated violations were involved. But one of the things, anytime we're looking at disciplinary action, to the bottom right, it's a little hard to see. There's something called Douglas factors. And it's a whole list of considerations that we weigh in when determining whether or not, or determining what the level of punishment should be or discipline should be. And so that's something that, if you want more information on, we can provide, or you can look it up. And yeah, Mr. Hale can provide.
Just add in here, there's a little bit of a check on this, in that the personnel system provides for some HR review depending upon the seriousness of the action. So there's collaboration there a lot of times for organizational consistency as well.
Right. And yeah, especially when it becomes a level of suspension at a certain, so if we get a suspension on a certain number of days up to demotion or termination, then HR reviews those as well. So that's another level of oversight and accountability. So there is an appeal phase. So for anything that is deemed disciplinary action, so if an officer has a property involved, then through county ordinance, then they have the opportunity to appeal. The first phase, that would be an informal appeal through the department. And, that could be anything from a grievance to, I don't agree with the disciplinary action. The second is a formal appeal to the, up to the chief of police. And so what we offer internally in our process, essentially the first appeal is within our disciplinary process internally. And so before an officer is actually disciplined, the chief serves that officer a notice of intent to discipline, whatever that is. I intend to suspend you for 3 days. That officer then has the opportunity for a internal review to meet with the chief and appeal that intended discipline prior to that final decision, to weigh in on any additional mitigating circumstances that they think are relevant to the decision. Then after that final decision is made. Once that's made, let's say that the chief said, well, I've heard what you said, and I still agree that this is the appropriate discipline. Then the officer has the right to appeal through the manager's office up to including a personnel hearing officer. So that's just part of the formal process to ensure they have their due process, and that we're not, improperly depriving them of certain rights they may have as an employee. And that's generally the process that we follow when discipline's involved. That doesn't apply to coaching or counseling or training issues.
All right. Any questions for Deputy Chief?
That's it.
All right.
I guess I have an HR question. I mean,
Yes.
So somebody's, in their categories, if something's not sustained or sustained or terminated. I mean, sometimes you mentioned privacy. I mean, a lot of these things are private issues that I would imagine if somebody's going to lose their job. Is that the case?
Public record.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah,
I'm just trying to figure out where the officer monitor would fit in on that.
Now, investigations are in process are not open record, nor for 10 days after they're completed. As an administrative investigation under Georgia Open Records, they're not available for 10 days, and then once that expires, they become an open record as well.
Okay. And I'm just looking at for any info, really. It wasn't just news for.
Sure. If I may add too, if there's a concurrent criminal investigation, that complicates what's available through open record as well, because a criminal investigation can last much longer than an administrative would.
Mm-hmm.
And it has essentially nothing beyond the initial report, or a few other initial documents are subject to open record during an active criminal investigation.
I will say, certainly we conduct discipline and investigations with as much confidentiality as the law allows, and we encourage people. We're certainly not going to be out there talking about it with anyone who doesn't need to know. We suggest you take the same approach, but ultimately, if it ends up in a disciplinary action, it's part of the record.
Yeah, and Attorney Hines is on the call, as well as Attorney Jackson is here, and they might want to weigh on this. But what I would say, just as an example, the police chief might go through an investigation and come up with a finding for one of the chief's officers. PSCOP might then come after the fact, look at that case and have a different perspective on it. That's something that could happen. So yes, potentially an officer is going to go through that process twice. I don't know if the attorneys would want to weigh in on that, but I think, alluding to your question, once they're done, it doesn't mean that this process is over, with PSCOP then going through it.
Sure, I would agree with that. There's, like there's starting to be multiple investigations taking place, but under the Open Records Act, for administrative investigations, as soon as they're finished, 10 days after they are finished, they're public record. Mm-hmm. Whereas for investigations, for a criminal matter, could certainly last up to months, years. It just depends on how long it takes to get to a final disposition of the criminal investigation.
Well, here's another question here. So the police chief has a different, and they have different opinions.
Mm-hmm.
Who's going to take precedent?
So the way the ordinance is written, it would be up to the manager and the chief. They could hear what PSCOP says, but they're under no obligation to agree with PSCOP's findings, and that's in the ordinance. So,
No, I would agree with that. There certainly may be additional evidence that pertains to the criminal matter that may not be part of the administrative investigation.
So if I may say one thing, that raises a good point. What Andrew Edwards said is, if some of the, these types of things are not without stress for our personnel, even if it may ultimately prove that they didn't do anything wrong, and they may know that from the beginning, but we have to go through the process. But it's not without stress, and so I do have concern, if we do a full investigation and then we come back and reopen it a second time to do it all over again, the amount of stress that would cause our personnel, I do have concern about that.
I wonder if there's not a review of the record and if there are questions or things that PSCOB might raise, it could be funneled back to the investigation for further look if they missed something, if there are questions that the police department would be bound to answer. That might save, as I think there's a lot of costs and time involved, not only just the stress, but doing something twice also creates a dual record, which may be problematic in some ways.
That's kind of what I thought would be happening, but maybe.
But for legitimacy, that's the role of PSCOB, to go through the process and be that voice for the public. So,
and this could be a good transition to the next presentation if not already, because the monitor position is that position that would be working, in this case, with the police department, going to the police department, talking to them, bringing information back to PSCOB. So I do think that there'll be a lot of that going on, not necessarily at the same time because of active investigations. But if y'all are ready, HR Director Jeff Hale has brought some of the answers to y'all's questions from last meeting to share in terms of org chart of operational analysis and potential grades and thinking about that position and options that y'all have. But thank you, Deputy Chief, for your presentation.
Okay. Thank you. Put that on the slide. Sure. So we'll talk about the reporting structure, which I understand is headed towards the operational analysis function and the auditor's oversight. So I prepared this with that in mind. Talk very quickly about where that process is for hiring the auditor that Commissioner mentioned, the current structure, and then some thoughts or recommendations that you all could entertain. Yeah. So that position is currently vacant. That position is a charter officer and is appointed by the mayor and commission. The way the reporting would work is that the auditor would develop his or her organization in response not only to the PSCOP function, but the broader work plan that the auditor's office or the Internet operational analysis undertakes. There are 2 full-time positions. There are some part-time interns as well for a total of 4 positions. Actually 5, including the auditor. And then, you would want, I think, as the commissioner anticipated, that individual would be able to assess the entire work plan, look at the current job descriptions and structure, hire in folks, look at relative skill sets and demands, and make decisions about how to assign that PSCOB function. And I don't talk about it as a position because it may be a full-time position. It may not be initially and evolve into one. There's a lot of potential possibilities here, and so there's flexibility to deal with all of that. So, as I understand it, the application deadline was extended for the internal auditor. Oftentimes these positions, and you're doing a national search, you need a little more time, and people will tend to wait till the last minute. So hopefully that will yield some additional qualified applications. The 28th through the 31st are slated for looking over those applications and anticipation of interviews on mid-April 13th and 14th. 21st for any follow-up interviews, and then a selection and appointment, which has a little bit of process associated with it, which I outlined here. That builds in additional time, not the least of which may be that whoever hire may or may not be from here and may need to relocate or work a notice at a current job. So those are pretty standard things. And of course, we do our due diligence in that space as well.
And for other charter, who was the last charter officer that was hired within ACC? Judd, yes. So this is pretty standard. It's standard process, main time. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
I think so. So you can't see this real well, and I did the best I could graphically with it, but our org chart essentially shows you the auditor in the white box. To the left are 2 part-time intern slots. You could certainly reduce or increase those depending on what the line item for part-time is and how many hours you want to provide somebody with, up to about 28 a week at most. And then to the right are full-time positions, each of which are management analysts. I have those job descriptions with me in the event that you want me to send them to you or show them up here. But so this is the structure that the auditor would come into. He or she could certainly see this differently based on the work presented, not inclusive of P-Scout monitoring. So one or both of those positions could work as the monitor. Let's go to the next slide real quick. So one option might be that the auditor decides to cross-train both of those professional positions in PSCOP. That would give you, a starting place to kind of see what the level of work requires, the workload, and what requirements you might need. It could be that a person at that level might be suitable for the level of work, and that could evolve over time. You may need a higher level position later. But that would give you the ability to kind of have 2 people, when there's a particularly complex issue, work together. Might give you some balance and diversity depending on personnel as well, working on that same issue. You would have, high demand times and low demand times when you could put one or both towards that task. And then also, to the extent you have employees taking leave for a variety of reasons or attrition, you have some continuity and ability for one or the other or both to serve that in that function. So that's an option, and I'll just kind of stop there, see if there's any.
So right now, there's nobody in the office.
It is vacant, truly vacant.
So the auditors come in and staff up.
And depending on the skill sets that you attract and are able to hire, that could impact any number of things in terms of structure.
Without revealing, are we getting a lot of applications for the auditor?
We have some healthy applications, yeah, we do. We don't have as many as we would like, and I think that's where we pushed it out a little bit to try to broaden and deepen the pool, because we want to get the best providers. And then another option, if we go one more slide, either at the outset or at any time, the auditor could avail him or herself of a repurposing of a vacant position. So you can take a vacant position and kind of, with a little bit of budget, either reducing the budget or increasing it within reason, repurpose that vacant position to another one that's in our inventory. We don't get a new position. So, for example, I think maybe early on we talked about the fact that with investigations and law enforcement, public safety, it might be useful to have attorney skills. And so, the auditor could make a recommendation to the manager to repurpose the job to an attorney. That would give you some higher level qualifications for kind of the research and complexity, a little bit higher compensation available to attract those skills. Perhaps somebody at that level might be able to support not just the PSCOP function better, but the broader work of the operational analysis as well. And that person could work in tandem with the management analyst as a lead over that person. Both of those positions would be reported to the auditor. So those are just some early thoughts about the flexibility that's available. Over time, as people work in positions for a year or more, they can be put into a reclassification review where we take a hard look at the position and decide whether it's at the appropriate pay level based on the law requirements, or whether it's, in fact, somebody's working out of class in a wholly different capacity now due to just change.
I do like the idea of PSCOP having somebody that has attorney, the kind of attorney requirements, because it kind of makes perfect sense to have that level of that degree to handle the potential cases. What do you guys think? Oh,
I think what Dexter said earlier is, let's get the auditor on board and get their thoughts on it.
Okay.
We gotta come over, I'm sorry, quick. They all we bring in for the auditor position, if they got any type of experience working for either county government or some other agency, they may have an idea about what they want to have in a position like that to look at work with Peace Corps and other groups and say, hey, this skill set I think we would need. It could be an attorney,
Could be an
it
investigator.
could be an investigator, so it could be a number of things.
Yes, sir.
But
Attorney is an example.
Right.
It provides a little bit broader, compensation but it may be difficult to find somebody. So there are a range of options that we could look at, depending on what the auditor makes sense.
Since when in Athens did it become difficult to find an attorney?
They're mindful if they're ready to.
No, I hear you.
raise their cost of
Just
And then the last slide is just so you can see kind of where the pay is. I haven't listed the maximum of the range simply because that's generally not available for people coming in. We generally see midpoint as someone who's competent here, been doing the job well for a number of years. And so we hope to get people to midpoint fairly quickly. It doesn't necessarily always happen, but between those are realistic based on our classification system.
All right, any other questions for Jeff?
All right, thank you, Deputy. Thank you, Jeff Taylor. Chief, Deputy Chief, ever since all of that. So I'll just make a recommendation that we put, sending anything to the full merit commission until we get an auditor monitor. Until we get someone staffed in the Office of Operational Analysis. Can I get a motion? Second?
Second.
All in favor? Moving on. Thank y'all for your time. Next on the agenda, we have just real briefly, what have been assigned to GOC is, what is let's see. So we have evaluated opportunities for inclusive Athens-Clarke County facilities, and how that originally started. Two of our parks did not have ADA accessibility to them. One in particular was Sandy Creek. Yeah, the Sandy Creek Park, Sandy Creek Nature Center. And then we had the Rainbow Forest that was not accessible to people who, for ADA people. So the mayor had decided that we need to look at all of our facilities. They want to be leased, they want to be owned, to take a look at, are they ADA accessible as well? And to also include bathrooms, to take a look at bathrooms as well. So.
I don't know where you want to go next, but it seems like we just have a new officer probably to put something together for us.
Well, so and that's why we invited our inclusion officer, Dr. Epps, but we also invited our leader services director and our interim central services director, because we wanted to hear from y'all what you were looking for that first meeting. So if we're aiming for next month to really dig into this, what can we as staff start pulling together? And so this is almost 2 years old. So to the chair's point, this was rooted in the Sandy Creek Nature Center. And so, what do you all want us to look at as we think about this agenda?
So should we examine all our facilities then?
Yeah, listen. Not right now.
We got what staff should bring, I guess we should,
You think just like I did from the morning?
but really examine our facilities, see whether or not we ADA compliant, not compliant, what would it take to come into compliance? That would be a cost factor there also.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that would be the route, but y'all, it be, I don't know.
And it may be more than just ADA issues as well. So.
Right.
Could be.
And I'm looking at.
If you want to clarify one point, the nature center itself is accessible. So when we built that nature playscape,
In the back.
if you recall, that was donated by the Sandy Creek Board, nonprofit board, after it was built. There's components of that people with mobile devices children with mobile devices were struggling. So it really is amenity within that location and not the location itself.
So,
But we're happy to do a contextual kind of intro into this topic at the next meeting. What we wanted to make sure is we were looking at the right level of facilities. So is it just leisure services facilities, or is it all facilities? That's the kind of stuff we need to know, because there's
all kind of facilities.
all parks and buildings, parking lots, current and future. And also to look at, unisex bathrooms.
okay.
How can we convert the bathrooms that we have now to unisex, or at least have one in each building to be a unisex bathroom?
Okay.
Well, if you got another one, you just go in one.
That's fine. I'm the same way.
Go in one. You see, because like,
But just to give y'all, we had to do that at UGA, the bathrooms. We had every building we had to convert. Now, sometimes what we did was, because they had holes, household urinals, we just put a sign on the unisex. So, so we ain't got to build stuff out.
Mm-hmm.
But we went, and I got charged with having to do all that on my department. So, I think when my commissioner on that was said it wouldn't be a bad idea. But I think if we don't have to reinvent the wheel with some of the restrooms,
Yeah.
it'll be helpful cost.
So maybe that's what we try to have for next meeting, is what facilities do have unisex bathrooms already, maybe as a data point. All right, and then we'll try to also bring definition around what accessibility in terms of ADA means as well. I don't know if staff has any other questions, y'all, as we prepare for next month. Is there anything that comes to mind you want to ask?
So you all want to just know about all facilities and the opportunity for unisex bathrooms in at least one of these buildings in the area.
At least one bathroom per building.
Perfect.
And a lot of old buildings in this government, as you know.
I think it's like,
Yeah, it's gonna take some.
Like here.
this is lovely, it's takes on.
But like this mobility, our elderly population, those who are physically challenged, would just take a broad look at, make sure people can come in and leave appropriately.
Okay, I think Gavin had a question too.
Yeah, I mean, we can certainly work on that, and, if you'd like to have other people join the discussion, although we can check what our status is right now in terms of facilities, the code requirements for accessibility, and even the number of restrooms and how they're designed, that's something that becomes a building code issue. So whether you would like a building code representative available, but also a fire marshal who use handicap accessibility. So those are two additional staff members potentially that could partake in the discussion.
I think it's just probably best at this point just to get a list of, like we just talked about, but I don't,
We'll see where it
it
goes.
seems like it could turn into,
Okay.
I mean, if we can look at the bathrooms and whatever improvements are needed on some ADA accessibility issues.
All right.
Do we have anyone on staff who is competent in ADA law and what is and is not required?
I mean, the attorney's office is happy to assist with ADA accessibility. So if there are any questions, please feel free to reach out.
Yeah, that's going to be important to know, because we don't have that capability. We know what the challenges are, but what the requirements are, and then all can be different. So,
Yeah, we can make sure we schedule a meeting with staff with the attorney's office in preparation. I think we have what we need.
I think we're just looking at facilities. I mean, there's some issues I'd like to bring up at some point, not necessarily now, but, on programming.
Right.
For accessibility.
Yeah, this is focused on facilities.
Yeah, that's good.
And I just want to put a reminder out there that one of the other things that was recently assigned was looking at the leasing policy again. And the reason I bring that up is it's on the items to be considered in the future. But you are going to see an agenda item that's delaying, updating, implementing the leases for 6 months into next year. so that y'all have time to address the leasing policy again. So that's gonna be something we're gonna have to look at soon. But I do think we can spend next month focused on just this item. But in the coming month, we'll have to get into the leasing policy as well, but we'll have more about that then. Anything else, Chair?
Open it, Jeremy?
Second? All in favor? See y'all tomorrow.
All right, thanks, y'all.
Congratulations. You got a promotion?
You did. Should I, pre-split pensions?
Hell,
Um,
I don't know.
Thank you, sir.